Today is December 29th, 2014. My name is Teresa Larson. I am talking with Carole Horowitz, who has had a long association with arts in Ames in many dimensions, but principally theater. Carole, do I have your permission to talk to you today?
Yes, you do.
And to record your voice and your picture?
Absolutely.
Many of us don't like to tell our birth dates, but if you would give me a rough approximation of when and where you were born, just to get our story
I was
started.
born in Brooklyn, New York, and I was born in Brooklyn, New York, came to Ames in 1961, and after I was finished with college. And it was actually my honeymoon because my husband was a brand new college professor, and he got this job at Iowa State University as a biochemistry professor, and so we came here, we married and came here on essentially on a honeymoon. So I've been in Ames since 1961, and so that is
A rough approximation of an age context.
Yeah, because I finished college and I came here, and there's my numbers.
Let's go back just to Brooklyn for just a moment.
Okay.
Because the seeds of love of theater were planted by your mother. Is this right? Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, my mother could have been, or would have liked to have been, a performer, but at the time when she was growing up and going to the Henry Street settlement with some people who really went on to be professionals, her parents did not think that that was the right profession for a young girl. And so she loved theater, and then she instilled that love was easy into me. And so we used to go to theater and movies, and I lived in Brooklyn, and we would go to Manhattan to see movies that had, at that time, film theaters like the Roxy and the Capitol and the Paramount. Those theaters down in Manhattan, down to Broadway, had live performers on stage, and so we would see the big bands, the Gene Krupas and the Artie Shaws, and we'd see that. And then when I got a little older, I'd go to Broadway shows too with her.
And your mother might have rubbed shoulders with some very famous people. Can you tell me some of those names?
Well, the only one I can remember right now is, and I'm sure that our audience, possibly they'd have heard of Sylvia Sydney. Mm-hmm. And Sylvia Sydney was somebody who was in my mother's dance group, I guess. But Sylvia Sydney went on to, she was in, one of the things she was in was, I think, the movie version of Elma Rice's Street Scene. But mm-hmm. she was in many shows, I think in the movies, believe in the 20s, 30s maybe, mm-hmm. maybe 40s.
When you went to theaters as a young person, to the movies and to the live performances, were you already aware that you had an evaluative sense in your personality? Do you remember coming out and being able to remember details about what happened?
Well, it was just, I was starstruck right from the start, and seeing The Wizard of Oz, and I really wanted to be Judy Garland's friend. I wasn't doing anything that I didn't know that she was a brilliant performer, but I wanted her to be my friend. So being starstruck was my thing. I was starstruck. I don't think I knew that she was an icon or that she had this really wonderful voice. I didn't know that, but I liked, and that went on through my whole life. I still am starstruck.
What was your college degree? What did you study in college?
I have a bachelor's degree in speech pathology, theater, and psychology.
And were you able to use those skills right after college?
Well, I really wanted showbiz, but I also had and I also got some other took coursework at the New School in Manhattan too, but that was not for the theater, for the pathology. That was more toward the theater. But what I did do is I tried to get jobs, and I didn't want to be a therapist in the school system. So I wanted to be in a hospital or clinic situation. But at the time I was graduated, that was occupational therapy and physical therapy were much more important than speech, and which I thought was wrong. So I had private students, and then I had jobs. I had jobs, peripheral theater jobs, and then I also had good friends from my Brooklyn College days who went into theater, and so some went and performed, but many of them became agents. And so there I had my wonderful starstruck ability, interest was I was able to hobnob and visit with very famous people, because I would go to backstage and visit with them. I even spent an evening or post-show. Anne Bancroft had performed Mother Courage, and so we went backstage because my friend Marty Litke was a young agent, and we went backstage and we visited with Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft before they were married. And it was a wonderful evening, and I had the best time because I remember Mel Brooks on Johnny Carson, and he would blow me away. He was so funny, and he still is. So I did that, and Carol Burnett, and I spent time with Dick Van Dyke. He didn't like me. I reminded, because they just said, anything I would say. They were in a show called Pantomime Quiz, and it was like a charade show. And my friend Marty was taking Jacques de Bergerac, was his client, who he was. They called it servicing. They did, and so he was servicing Jacques de Bergerac, and Carol Burnett was there, and Dick Van Dyke, and we were visiting. And boy, every time I said something, bada bing, he didn't like me. It was not a good experience, but it wasn't long, and I just knew that. But Carol, I felt very close to, but again, in my starstruck way, because we had gone to see her in Once Upon a Mattress, and went backstage and saw her in that, and visited with her very short time, and also Anne Bancroft and Patty Duke backstage with Miracle Worker. I could just go on. I did have a bad experience with Ginger Rogers.
Do you want to share?
Just that she wasn't very pleasant. I lived in Brooklyn, and on Avenue M in Flatbush, and the largest color TV studio. Color was an early entity, because I'm old. Not everything was in color, and this was the color studio. NBC had the color studio on Avenue M. I lived on Avenue M, but I lived in a more residential. This was more in the shopping area, whatever. And I would go to see, Marty would take me to see the stars that he was servicing, and so he wasn't. It was a show, and that he was. I can't remember who his person was, but Ginger Rogers was there, and yeah, she wasn't. She was grumpy, but yeah. So I have, but I'm starstruck. It's not that. Yeah, I just love to be with celebrities like you. I remember when you were TJ Beer, and you would invite me to be interviewed for one of my entities. I've had a very long career here in Ames, and yeah, it was exciting to be on the air with you, Teresa TJ.
And the circle continues to roll. But let's think about this. So you had all of this wonderful, rich theater experience in New York, and then in 1961 you come to Ames. Now, forgive me, it must have been an enormous contrast.
It was. Fortunately, I have had a wonderful husband, and but it was new, and I was not happy to be here. We didn't have C.Y. Stevens Auditorium. We didn't have the Iowa State Center. We didn't have Jack Trice Stadium. We didn't have bagels. We didn't have Chinese restaurants. Hello. And but what I did do is I became, one of the most exciting things in my life happened here in Ames, and with my speech pathology. I'll share that. But Jack knew that, my husband is Jack, and he knew that I wasn't very happy here. And he told me, and this is, for the archives, I guess, and everybody who knows me knows this particular anecdote, because he had a grant, and he said 1, maybe 3 years. So he said 1 to 3, and my answer is I got life.
We were talking about a speech pathology experience that you had here at Ames before we go on to talk about theater, and it was a meaningful one. So can you tell me a little bit more about it? It
wouldn't have happened for me anyplace else, because all I had was a bachelor's degree, and I had done I practiced a little bit, but only with articulation problems and nothing very severe. And what had happened was that a woman called me soon after we had come to Ames and said that she has a son who's at a school for the deaf, and but he was diagnosed as deaf, but now the school officials, etc., say he's not deaf, but he's not speaking. So would I be interested in working with him? And I said, I don't think you have the right person, because my background is very minimal, and well, if not you, nobody. And he's coming home after Christmas and for Christmas, and so they invited the family invited me to dinner with my husband to check us out, and so they thought that we passed, but did I want to do it? Well, anyway, the young boy had a lot of skills. I mean, he had a lot of training. He could read, he could write, he wasn't speaking, and he wasn't hearing. So we started working, and what I had learned at Brooklyn College in speech at that time, that you don't overextend the sessions. But this mother was very insistent. And I had nothing to do. Remember, I was new, and there wasn't a lot happening in Ames for me. So we did 4 mornings a week, and I think it was 2 hours. And because Jack would come home for lunch, and I would say, I'm stealing these folks' money because I don't think I'm getting anywhere with this young boy. Well, it was a very cold, awful winter, and I was down anyway and not liking Ames very much. And John, we had a big kitchen, a very large kitchen and we worked at the kitchen table, and it overlooked the garage, but there was, we could see that it was very dark and dismal, and in fact, I wrote to my folks about that winter, and I said, ooh, something's wrong, it didn't snow today. It was just awful. So suddenly we're sitting, and we had been working, I'd been trying, I tried to think maybe he's feigning this deafness, and so I would drop a marble behind my back, and he didn't respond. So he was not hearing. So one day, this horribly dark, dismal day, I heard a bird. And I said, his name was John, I said, John, listen, bird. He heard it. And all of a sudden, something opened, and he ran around my kitchen, and we both were weeping, and he could hear I had a metal garbage waste can, but garbage can, ash, yeah, and that. When the refrigerator motor went on, it vibrated. He could hear that. He could hear the motor of the refrigerator, and we were out of our mind with excitement. And what I think happened is he was 7, and sometime when and from my study of him and his background, sometime back when he was 3, he turned it off, because I think he had auditory aphasia. I think that everything sounded the same. A knock on the door, a ring of the bell, a voice, and music and everything. Everything sounded the same. I think that was my diagnosis, but it didn't matter. We started from scratch, and he went off. He graduated from college ultimately, and he's a plumber has a plumbing contracting business in Austin, Texas. So anyway, that was it. And then I was like, Lord, people would bring troubled children and challenge children to me, and I couldn't do it. I mean, it just happened with John, and something was working for us, and I think having those clues, those cues, he was able to read, he was able to write, helped me. So so that was very exciting and thrilling. Never would have happened anyplace else but Ames, Iowa. So I have to be grateful, even though at that time they had no bagel or Chinese restaurant.
How'd you get involved in theater then in Ames?
Oh well, so at the same time that I was working with John, we were told, we were brand new. Newlyweds, we had not established any kind of credit, and one of my uncles said, when you get to that town, go to the bank and take a modest loan so that you will establish credit, because we didn't have Visa and MasterCard at that time, right? So we went to First National Bank, and Roger Alley was the president. I guess he was the president of the bank, and he was very warm and friendly for our small loan, and got to know us, and what do you do, and what are you interested in? So I said, well, my background, Jack, we knew, was a biochemist and had all his degrees, and he was, but what about me? I said, well, I like theater, and I'd done theater in college too. So I said, I like theater. He said, there's an organization in this community, the Ames Community Theater, is called Actors, and maybe you'd like to get involved with them. And so the rest is history, because I did contact them, and they were, Isabel was the name of the lady who was directing Man in a Dog Suit. And
this is about 1962 we're talking about.
No, I think
61?
it was still 61.
61. Okay, that's all right. General dates are okay.
Okay, but I just so I thought I would knock their socks off, because I have all this background, and I didn't get cast. See, but she did Isabel something. Anyways, Isabel asked me to be the assistant director. But I went to the audition with Jim Orngard, who was then with KASI. So he too thought he'd knock their socks off. He didn't get cast. So we went out for a beverage after, and and so I'm looking now at the Actors' 50th anniversary on stage program, and so this helps me to figure out what shows when. So the 61-62 season that opened with Man in a Dog Suit. So I got there here in June, I think, and then by September I was the assistant director of Man in the Dog Suit. See, so I worked fast. Yeah, that was here's a good story. We the third play that season, so I was getting involved in everything, and I had this one, my husband was so wonderful and so just happy that I was involved in something, and because I grumped, and so he was, and very supportive and wonderful, and of course we were brand new married, and he would get a kick out of people say, it's a wonderful town to bring up children. Well, we didn't have any, so at that time. So the third show was Call Me Madam, And I don't know if people who possibly are going to view this remember Ed Weiss. And Ed Weiss was in that show. And Ed Weiss was terrific. And he was on WI with House with the Magic Window, and I don't know what other...
Graves and Manor, lots of people remember his caricature, kind of a spooky guy in Graves and Manor on WI. A consummate actor, always doing interesting things. And he was also a musician, was he not?
I don't know that.
Yeah.
I don't know that because I knew that he was in that show. And I knew another celebrity. Whew, he was on WI. OI. And so he was in that show. He was in Call Me Madam. And there was an entrance that he was supposed to make. Where is it? I was probably doing props. I was backstage. I was doing props or something not on stage. And he had gone to the restroom. And he missed his cue. So the guys on the stage were ad-libbing in that particular for that show. So that I remember, I thought maybe you'd get a kick out of throwing his name out and with a owie, because he was a pro. He was a pro, but he missed his cue.
Tell me a little bit about what the Actors theater productions were like in the 1960s. How sophisticated were they in terms of the production values?
It depended on the talent. Ames is a remarkable place, I believe. I believe that when you're going to find talent, if you need something or someone to do something in the community, but maybe not even talent, even when you want to build an ice skating rink. We're just a remarkable town, and we make it happen. And I believe that if you're doing something positive, good things are going to happen. I could move on to
Sure.
What happened at the meeting, the annual meeting that was held at the library when it was an auditorium and it had a raised stage, and sometimes there were things done there. I don't think actors ever did anything there. But anyway, we're sitting and having this annual meeting, and the woman who essentially started Actors, Lillian Feinberg, stood up and said, I think that, and now this is at the 65 annual meeting, 1965. And she said, I think Actors has run its course. I think because I was one of the originators, I can say this. I think with the Armory having touring Broadway shows and Visha doing Broadway shows, and the Iowa State Theater,
in Curtis Hall doing shows.
We did. Actors did shows in Curtis Hall too, but
yes.
ISU Theater did shows at Shattuck, and anyway, we didn't need it, she said. Joy Bartell, whose husband was a very well-known chemist at the time, was a very imposing, a small woman, but she was strong, and she stood up and she said, I don't think that should happen. Now this is 65, and I'm telling you that in 2014, it's live and well, so I'll jump the gun. But Joy said, I'll be the president, and I asked Carole Horowitz to be the program director. And if she'll be the program director, we're going to go on next year. And I will see that it continues. And so that did happen. And in 65, we really came of age because, and you asked about talent. What do? They're here. The talent is here. You just have to find them. And I didn't really know what I was going to do in terms of program at that time, but there was a fellow by the name of Chuck Sohn, who was a professor of a young English professor. And I asked him, I knew him and had met him, and said, would you be interested in directing anything for the Ames Community Theater. He would, and only Death of a Salesman. Only, and say, holy smoke, and when are you free? Because we did things according. He told me it would be the first show. I said, okay. I said, and I said, oh, how can we open with such a play? And that was at McKay. We did this at McKay with George Wilson and Helen Hernstadt. And I think Fred Valier was in that. I think Fred Valier was one of the sons. Anyway, so those are names that people who are interested in Ames history, they know these people. Then,
I'm getting goosebumps thinking about that cast. What a cast, Carole! What a cast!
That's what I'm telling you. So the fact is, they were good. They were professional. It worked. It worked, and so quality was there. We didn't have money. I don't think we had elaborate sets, but of course, for Death of a Salesman, you don't need elaborate sets. Then, what am I going to do? What's the second show? But from 61 to 65, I'd been here 4 years. I already had, and I had, maybe I had a newborn. But there we are with my husband again. He was so responsive and caring that I get might do things that he took care of my babies and my boys. We have 2 boys, but in 65 I only had 1. But I had heard from 61 when I came to 65 that Gilbert and Sullivan, not cool. To do Gilbert and Sullivan, it's just not the thing to do.
Too old-fashioned.
Yeah, well, it's
silly.
It's just not intellectual enough for Ames, and this is a community of whatever. We did it. We did Pirates of Penzance, and we discovered the most wonderful performers. This man was a retired service person who was in engineering, and his name was Paul Barkus, and he that was his debut, and he then ran actors. I mean, he was such a talent, and then we had Charlie Hammer, who was a city council person and also a professor of physics, and his wife Hazel Buttercup. No, I don't know. Anyway, so I'm in the wrong show. So, and just Dorothy Danielson, whose husband was they came out of the woodwork, and it was so fun. It was so fun. Jim Oakey, who was the first president of Actors, he worked at that time. He worked at the Department of Transportation, and he directed that show. So it was terrific. It was terrific, and his friend Shirley Held did the costumes for that show.
And there it is, quite a period piece.
And
yes.
So it worked, and people liked it. Maybe I was just prejudiced, but I came from New York, so I think we did great things. And then a wonderful man, John Huseby, who he went on. He was a print collector. And I can't remember, do you remember did you remember John?
The name is sitting back there, and it's waiting for some more association, but I'll think about that.
But he directed Waltz of the Toreador. So that season, we came back with Pirates of Penzance and Death of a Salesman and Waltz of the Toreadors. We came back. And then the next season we did Guys and Dolls with the wonderful Nancy Kegley, who's now passed. She was Nancy Fawcett most recently, and she passed. She was, for me, the most talented all-round performer, director, actor, singer, dancer, and she was in Guys and Dolls. And Maureen Friedrich. Maureen Friedrich was the Salvation Army person, and anyway, so that was the next season, And moving on, we did How to Succeed in Business, and we had good people in that one. They just did it very well in 2013, but actors did, and it was sensational. But that cast had Lynn Fawcett as the vamp, and Maureen Friedrich again was our ingenue lady, and so and now we have Mr. Bigley was of course Paul Barkas, and so that was in '67, and so Bells Are Ringing then came in '68, and that was with Suzanne Saffone, and that was Helen Hernstadt was in that one. So yeah, I can't say anything negative. I loved them, and I was backstage most of the time. I tended to be props, I think.
Were the houses full?
Oh yes. Oh yeah, you can remember that, I bet. Yeah, we did. We had to turn people away. I remember we did Fiddler we did Fiddler on the Roof at Curtis, and I remember we were
With Bill Boone?
Yes.
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 Fantastic.
Yes. And so we had to turn people away and ask them, we would try to squeeze them in, but we asked them to come back the next night, please, because it's a wonderful show. And I don't remember if we only played one weekend at that time. I don't remember that, but those were good shows.
Now you find that you're getting good talent, you're getting good houses. Was ever actor on the ropes financially?
Not that I know of. In fact, I was president in '73, '74, and that's when we got the building. See, we had been...
Tell me how that happened. I think there's a good story there. How did that work out?
Okay. I was on the board of actors for many years, and we had a building committee, and I'm going to be sexist, and it was the guys. And they went to different places, and they talked to different real estate agents, and I would sit and listen because that wasn't my committee. But we were still up above pennies. We were up above pennies, and so some of the stuff was housed, our sets at a farm, and I think university let us use some of their space. I don't know, and then I don't know where the costumes were at that time. Anyway, we had no building space. We had no. Sometimes we would, if we collaborated with like the high school, maybe we could do a show at the high school, and then anyway, it was not happening. So I became president, and I said was what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a building. And so I connected with then a remarkable, wonderful lady called Mary Jane Fisher, who is now Mary Jane Clitheroe. And she was a realtor. And we bonded, and we were going to make this happen. So she found this very obscure piece of land over west of town, and it was part of a farmland that somebody in Ames owned, and whatever. And so maybe we'll buy that. So we did buy that, and then now we needed a building. So did you know Laura Daly, for instance? Laura Daly, who was
a writer.
She was a writer, and she was in Newton. I don't think she was news service. She was in development, I think, at that time. Development was very different.
Yes.
Development was very different, but... And
when I say a writer for Iowa State University.
Iowa State University.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so and she was a very, very loyal Ames Community Theater actors theater goer. She went to all the shows. And so I became acquainted with her and thought she was a pretty wonderful lady. And we're going to do a fund drive. Another person I had on the committee was wonderful Earl Gibbs. Earl Gibbs had a plumbing business in Ames, and he loved actors. So he was going to be on my building committee, and how do you get the building? So we're going to have to get money, because we didn't, we were working shoestring. And so we're going to have a fund drive. And so we had a fund drive. And Earl said, I'll tell you what you do. You have a dinner and you pay for the dinner. So you invite all the people that you think would be interested in helping actors build a building, and then that's more likely they'll contribute than if they paid at that time probably $20 for a meal. But anyway, so do that. You pay and invite people to a dinner. And I had to be the keynote, right? I never knew how to do that, so I called.
Oh no, you knew how to speak.
No, I didn't. I was a kid. This is 1970 something. Okay, so no, I never really spearheaded stuff. I was on committees. We started children's theater in '68, and we still have children's theater. But I mean, to do something like this, and anyway, I called Laura, and I said, I got to give this talk, and I'm going to have to ask for money of this crowd. And she said, Carole, just talk as you're talking to me. Don't worry about it. Just talk and say it. And those words have helped me now. I have done this a lot, right? But not fundraising, but in public. I do a lot of public speaking, and so that was it, and that's what I did, and we did very well. And so the numbers are silly because at that time, $25,000 was hoo-ha, yeah. So anyway, so we got all these pledges, so we could build a shell of a building. A steel building. I forgot what they call them. What do they call those steel buildings?
I'm thinking Morton Building, but maybe something else. But
I
go ahead.
don't know. So called Friedrichs. Now, I called a few places and got bids. And Friedrich came up with and Bob Jr. worked with us, and we bought this shell. Then I was going away. Jack was going to be at Yale for a year on a sabbatical, and I the shell was built, but I left it to actors and came back to walls and a room, and so everybody pitched in, and we had a building. And the building was designed to be storage. Remember, we didn't have storage for costumes and sets, an area to build. And we were performing at everywhere, the high school, the Welch Junior High, which was would be called a middle school now. And so but those buildings, those schools, started using their auditorium. And so we were just getting in there for Tech Week when we would go. Because before we could have rehearsals there, only Tech Week. So we built, what we did, we had Max Culver, who was a tech person at Iowa State Theater. I had those kind of connections, and he advised us how to build this building. And so we made the main room the same size as the auditorium, as the stages at the high school. See, the high school and Welch.
So when you put down the marks for the actors, they have the same spatial relationships as when they went to the next auditorium.
Yeah. That's what we did. But then time went on, and it turned out that we weren't getting into those spaces anymore at all. And the powers that be, as time went on, I wasn't that active in actors anymore, but those folks said, let's make it a theater. And now, if you go to 120 Abraham Drive, it is a theater. And it's a black box theater, and it has been since 1977, because we built it, and it finished in 76, and then it was expanded.
Tell people what a black box theater is so people understand.
Black box theater is a small space that you can it's small and sort of concrete walls and black, and it's versatile. So you can do, it's for small theater productions, so you can do anything in that space. You can do anything in that space because it's just black walls, and then you can do your sets and your, and for a while.
So you don't have to worry about drawing curtains, so that's what I'm getting you to say. And you don't have proscenio arch and all that kind of stuff.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But see, now it's a very sophisticated theater. But getting to this point, before we had folding chairs at the to make it into a theater, and we could put the stage any place we wanted. We would have anyway. So, but Actors has a building, and that's a very exciting thing. And when I travel, and even in Iowa City, which has a fairly sophisticated and
well, they have an MFA program there too.
Yeah. And theater, their Riverside, their community theater has not got what we have. We really have a very ample quality space with, you have to go and get a tour, sometimes maybe a tour of the costumes upstairs and the props upstairs, and then you have the building area with all the lumber housed and stored. It's really terrific, and that wasn't me. It's what happened.
Well, it started in 1973 when you said, let's build a building. Let's get our own space. Yeah.
It was okay.
So just because I've had just a little bit of theater experience, I know that not everything on stage goes as planned. That there are things that happen. Are you free to talk as a tech person about funny things or a director person or as an onstage person about funny things that you've observed?
Well, one comes right to mind, but you'll pardon the expression earlier. My story earlier about what's his name, who forgot his.
Ed Weiss. Yeah.
Ed Weiss.
Yeah.
Helen Hernstedt was directing a children's theater show. This is many years ago. Children's theater began in 1968 because it started. Veronica Rudenberg and Nancy Kegley at the time had puppets, and they did a puppet show at the Baptist Church on Lynn. And I went with one of my small children, or maybe both, and it was packed. And they had to do an afternoon show. So I said to Helen, I think we need a children's theater because Marjorie Pohl had something. Do you remember what she had?
I don't. I just know her children. Sorry.
Yeah, but she had some kind of children's thing. I think she brought, this is before my time, I think she brought theater to Ames for kids, I think. So, it was 1967, and anyway. So I said to Helen, I think we need it. She says, I'll consult. I don't want to be part of it. So she was consult. All right. So, but time moves on, and we did. She was directing a show. Let's see. The guy would have been 6, and so we're talking about 44 years ago, probably. No, 40, something like that. At least 40 plus years ago. And she was doing The Tailor of Gloucester, I think that was the show. And at that time, we didn't, now you can't have to be 10 to be in a children's theater show. But then we cast, and this was a 6-year-old. And so it was a dress rehearsal, and Tim wasn't on stage. So Helen said, find him. And you have to love and know Helen Hernstedt. Find him. Well, he went to the bathroom. And she said to him, I don't care. Even if you have to do whatever you're doing on stage, you stay there. He is now a major architect in LA, I think now. that guy. So so we had that. I don't know. I have another one. Charlie Hammer was the stage manager, and I was props. And we were doing, it was either Guys and Dolls or Bells Are Ringing, and I was props. And he told me that I bring out the table for the...
And someone knocks. Carole, we were talking about things that happen in theater that aren't necessarily planned, because it's just live and things just happen. You mentioned, of course, about Ed Weiss not being where he was supposed to be, and this young child who Helen heard said, "You be here or else." Are there other things that you could think of in the process of putting on actors, productions at Ames?
I have another story. I was props on, I think it was Guys and Dolls. And they changed to, the scene changes to, he takes her to Mexico or somewhere. Do you know that? Anyway, and so we change, and I have to bring out a table, and someone else, and I guess there are chairs. They're at a bistro or a nightclub in this, where they go on this trip. And so I have the table, and I said to Charlie Hammer, who was the stage manager, you'll tell me when. And I was in black. It was good, because when you do backstage, you're in black, so that was good. And he said, now, and the lights come up, and here I am carrying the table and putting it down, and then very professionally walked off, and I said, my mother's not here. Yeah, because, I mean, if I'm going to be on stage,
you get a line.
You need a family. Yeah, you need your family to see you on stage. So I do remember that. But there were things like that. And
now, I recall that Curtis Auditorium had very little backstage.
You want to tell about that?
No, you tell about that.
They did indeed. And so in order to make crosses, go from stage right to stage left, you'd have to go downstairs. You'd have to go downstairs and outside and go around. And so when the director would block the show, they took that into consideration. And so a lot of the times, you made your exit from the same place you could make your entrance, but not always. And so sometimes it was very cold outside. And I remember a show that they did, A Deadly Game, with Roy King. And he came back for his entrance with snow on his hair. So anyway, but that was good. And then the other thing about Curtis, you cannot flush the toilet. Do not flush the toilet, because they could hear it. So that was another, if you have to use a bathroom, not there. So yeah, it made for fun. It made for interesting thing, but we filled it. Actors filled Curtis Auditorium. I don't remember the house size, but they filled it. A lot of times I grew into the Publicist, is what happened to me. I went from backstage props to doing a lot of publicity. In volunteer organizations, it's very hard to find a publicist, because people are on that, to take on that volunteer experience to help the organization. I mean, to work with the organization and to be on stage if it's community theater. So they're very hard to find somebody who will sell.
Well, that's sustaining work. That's sustaining work, as opposed to one play when a director or a tech person or an actor says, I'll give you my time for 2-3 months. Some of these other things are ongoing.
Yeah, and also you have to have a certain kind of personality to be a publicist, because you have to be able to promote others. Sometimes in the arts, people tend to be self-motivated, and it's hard for them to say, hey, isn't she good? But, right? I mean, it's a publicist, but anyway, and also follow-through. You have to have follow-through. You have to really be on it. So I became.
What do you think is your best contribution in that role then? What do you think you did that has made a difference for actors in that role?
I don't want to say that, but while I was there, I hope I was an important entity. But you know,
you got the houses filled anyway.
Well, we did that. I did that, but nothing happens alone. See, here's I had this for you. This was the season brochure that I was responsible for in 2000, 2001. We did Pirates of Penzance again, it looked like. But that, so we had to come up with, so that we sold season tickets, and that was a season brochure. So for the 2000, 2001 season. But it was a very much a part of my life, and I wanted it to succeed, and it was, and I so enjoyed the people, and I enjoyed what they accomplished. People like Keith Wirtz, who now he was a hairdresser and a theater. I don't know if he was probably a theater major at Iowa State. In 1971, Children's Theater collaborated with actors on Pinocchio. Oh, and by the way, Nancy Kegley was Pinocchio and pregnant. So we had a pregnant Pinocchio that year. And the late John Clem who just recently passed, he was Geppetto. And so we need the set. I never knew that people did this for volunteer. We had the show and the set wasn't ready, and Keith made it an all-nighter. He spent he was a college student, and he spent the whole night finishing the set. And that's the kind of dedication that I enjoyed. So it was a pleasure for me to promote this kind of entity or this kind of activity.
I understand that part of its mission, actors' mission, is of course to entertain. But theater also encourages deep thinking. And sometimes if people who select plays go down that path, you can sometimes even get farther to the controversial element. Did actors ever find itself in a position where there was a play or a choice made with grounded, good thinking, but it was not necessarily accepted by everybody?
Oh, I think that's happening more frequently, more recently, and not when I'm not that involved, because the plays today are very explicit, and the language is explicit, and there are people who walk out, who currently, but they're not the plays that I deal with. Most of what I'm doing now is mostly children's theater.
Right. But I was just wondering, for the history of actors, sometimes a very, very good play is chosen for very, very good reasons, but it might not match the expectations of somebody who's in the audience.
Well, I think mostly it's mostly language and maybe situations. But I think they may have. I know that people told me that at some play people didn't stay because actors has a very loyal following. It's not the same as in the 70s or the 80s, because indeed there are other avenues and of entertainment and or things that, families are different. They with both parents working, it's just a very different dynamic. It's just different. But anyway, I think that actors with Lynn Lloyd, Stan Raby, Brian Parrish, who's a performer, those people have returned to the fold. They were not part of actors for a long while, and they've come back. And there's Emily and Jason Paul are young new people who've come in, and she's a very, very talented musician, pianist, and he's just a terrific behind-the-scenes guy, but also he does stuff on stage too. So it evolves, and they have people that continue. And the thing that's so interesting, I don't know, they don't get paid. They don't get paid. And you do get paid. You get paid in a way that is not monetary, but you get paid because most of the things that I've done in Ames have been volunteer.
I wanted to talk about collaboration because Actors has collaborated with other entities for productions. And tell me a little bit about one that you worked so hard on, The Sound of Music.
Oh, wow. That was
year?
83, September 83. What happened was that there was a then new professor in charge of theater. And I don't know how I became acquainted with him. His name is David Hervella. He's passed now. And he was the professor in charge of theater. And then we connected. I don't remember how, but we talked about producing Sound of Music at C.Y. Stevens. And then make it into a community and make it into a university collaborative experience. And so we got the music department, and I believe it was Larry Burkhalter, I think, was chair then. And he was also the conductor of the orchestra. And then we got Actors and the organization that I'm most affiliated with, Children's Theater. And so those two community, Actors, Children's Theater, two university, music department and ISU Theater, collaborated and had probably the most, I've had a lot of exciting, wonderful experiences, but that probably was the best for me because we went to Dick Snyder, who was then the chair, the director of the center, and he told, David and I were really the co-producers, and he said, I don't think you should do this because Visha's losing money now. Visha's losing money. They're not filling the house. Well, we thought we could do it. And indeed we did. And it was September 83 and 3 performances, and we had 97% house of the 3, and it's 2,700 people.
Wow. And
then just to mention names, you like me to mention names?
Yes.
Mickey Gibbs, who was Earl Gibbs' widow at that time, she came to the Sunday performance and she said, Carole, there's love here. You know, it was really a very, very special.
Very moving time. Yes. I'm wearing out your voice box. So
I don't get worn out, but I'm taking a lot of your time because I can go on. We're not talking about children's theater so much.
You know what I'd like to do? Let's do that another time.
Okay.
And why don't we invite Maureen Friedrich to join us?
Well, that'd be fun.
Wouldn't that be fun? I think that would be great. So I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts with me today. It's been a delight.
Well, this is like therapy for me, and so I appreciate this very much too. It's my life in Ames, and even though I got life, things happen, and that's what Ames is about. You make it happen, and Teresa, you know that too. You know that too, because here you are, and you're going to cut this, but here you are in this role. And so 5 years ago, 4 years ago, I don't know, you weren't thinking about going to people's homes and videoing them and whatever. It's a make it happen community. I don't know if others are like this, but anyway.
Well, you've been a very important part of it, and you did make some really good things happen. So thank you for sharing your thoughts.
You're very welcome.